Aboard the Aegis, the bridge was bathed in the cold blue glow of tactical displays. Captain Elias Ford leaned forward, his steel-gray eyes fixed on the holographic map that showed the enemy fleet closing in. The tension was palpable, but Ford's expression was calm, almost serene. His fingers traced the edges of the console, as if feeling the pulse of his ship. "Captain," Lieutenant Arya Wolf spoke, her voice clipped, betraying a hint of the anxiety she kept buried beneath her disciplined exterior. "The message has been sent to the alien fleet." "No response yet." Ford nodded slightly, his gaze never leaving the map. "They won't respond. They think it's a bluff." Across the void, Admiral Vralik of the Zarkith Dominion stood on the bridge of his flagship, surrounded by a host of officers. The Zarkith ships were sleek and predatory, their hulls bristling with weapons designed to tear through armor and shields alike. The Admiral's yellow eyes narrowed as he read the human transmission again, a warning, laced with veiled threats, about the dangers of engaging the human vessel. "Arrogant primitives," Vralik spat, his voice a deep growl. "They think a single ship can stand against us? We'll show them what real power looks like." His officers nodded in agreement, their eyes gleaming with the anticipation of an easy victory. Back on the Aegis, Captain Ford stood, the creak of his chair audible in the silence that had settled over the bridge. "They'll come for us," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "Prepare the crew. Activate Protocol Ironclad." Arya's eyes widened slightly, but she knew better than to question the captain's orders. "Aye, sir," she responded crisply, turning to relay the command. All around the ship, lights dimmed as the Aegis shifted into battle readiness. Weapons powered up, shields hummed to life, and every crew member knew that the next few minutes would decide their fate. As the Zarkith fleet approached, Vralik's flagship led the charge, confident in their numerical superiority. "Focus all fire on the human vessel," Vralik ordered, his voice dripping with disdain. "Crush them." But the Aegis did not move. It remained motionless, a lone sentinel against the darkness. The alien ships closed in, weapons locked, ready to strike. Then, without warning, the Aegis unleashed a pulse of energy that rippled through space, disrupting the targeting systems of the entire Zarkith fleet. Chaos erupted on Vralik's bridge as alarms blared and screens flickered. "What is this?" Vralik roared, slamming his fist into a console. His officers scrambled, but the damage was done. The Aegis moved with deadly precision, cutting through the confusion like a blade through fog. One by one, the alien ships faltered, their formations collapsing under the weight of Ford's strategy. On the Aegis, Ford watched the unfolding battle with the calm detachment of a chess master executing a well-planned move. "They underestimated us," he murmured, almost regretfully. "They always do." As the Zarkith fleet struggled to regain control, Vralik realized the truth: the warning had not been a bluff. Panic set in, but it was too late. The Aegis was upon them, and the battle was already lost. Captain Ford's voice echoed across the bridge, steady and unwavering. "Fire at will." The chapter ended with the crackling energy of weapons fire, and the realization that the Zarkith had made a fatal mistake. The warning had been clear, but arrogance had clouded their judgment. Now, all they could do was face the consequences. Captain Elias Ford stood on the bridge of the Aegis, his gaze fixed on the chaos unfolding in the void. The Zarkith fleet, once a looming threat, was now scattered, their ships disoriented by the surprise strike. The blue glow of tactical displays cast eerie shadows across the faces of his crew, all of whom wore expressions of focused determination. "Target the lead ship," Ford commanded, his voice calm and precise. "Take out their command structure." Lieutenant Arya Wolf's fingers danced across her console, inputting the coordinates with practiced efficiency. "Coordinates locked," she confirmed, her voice steady despite the rising tension. The crew waited, breath held, as the targeting reticles aligned with their prey. In the distance, Admiral Vralik fought to regain control of his flagship. Sparks flew from damaged consoles, and the smell of burnt circuitry filled the air. Panic flared in his yellow eyes as he barked orders, his usual composure unraveling. "Reform the lines!" counter their attack. But the Zarketh ships were in disarray, their cohesion shattered by the Aegis's opening gambit. Ford had anticipated their every move, exploiting the gaps in their formation with ruthless precision. "Fire!" Ford ordered, his voice a razor's edge. The Aegis unleashed a volley of plasma bolts, searing through the blackness of space. The projectiles struck Vrolok's flagship, tearing through its shields like paper. The ship shuddered violently, and for a moment, the void was illuminated by a cascade of fiery debris. Ford watched the impact with cold calculation. He knew this wasn't just a battle of ships, it was a battle of wills. The Zarketh had underestimated humanity, seeing them as little more than a fledgling species with primitive technology. They had failed to understand that human ingenuity wasn't just about machines, it was about the minds that wielded them. "Status report," Ford called out, his eyes never leaving the tactical display. Lieutenant Wolf scanned the data streaming across her console. "Their command structure is collapsing, sir. Several of their ships are retreating. The rest are disorganized, trying to regroup." "Good," Ford replied, nodding slightly. "Press the advantage. Keep them on the defensive." As the Aegis continued its assault, Vrolok's desperation mounted. He could feel the battle slipping away, the confidence of his officers waning. He had never faced an enemy like this, one that fought with such relentless determination, one that turned their weaknesses into strengths. "We can't hold them," one of his officers stammered, fear creeping into his voice. "We need to retreat." "No!" Vrolok snarled, slamming his fist onto the armrest. "We are the Zarketh Dominion! We do not retreat!" But even as the words left his mouth, he knew it was over. The humans had outmaneuvered him, outthought him. And now, as his fleet crumbled around him, he faced the bitter truth: he had underestimated his enemy, and it would be his undoing. On the Aegis, Ford could sense the shift. The Zarketh were faltering, their aggression giving way to fear. It was time to end this. "Bring us in closer," he instructed. "Let them see our resolve." The Aegis surged forward, its engines flaring as it closed the distance to the enemy flagship. Vrolok's eyes widened in disbelief as the human ship loomed ever larger, its weapons charging for a final strike. In the silence that followed, Ford's voice rang out, clear and resolute. "This is your last chance to surrender. There will be no mercy if you refuse." The chapter ended with the Zarketh teetering on the brink of defeat, their fate hanging in the balance. Would they retreat, or would they fight to the bitter end? The answer would determine the outcome of this battle, and the future of the galaxy. The Aegis held its position, engines thrumming with a latent power that resonated through the ship's hull. Captain Elias Ford stood at the center of the bridge, his eyes locked onto the image of the Zarketh flagship, now a crippled giant listing in the void. The air was thick with anticipation, the tension mounting with every second of silence. "Still no response from their command, sir," Lieutenant Arya Wolf reported, her voice low and measured. "They're stalling." Ford's jaw tightened. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This battle was more than a clash of fleets, it was a test of resolve, a duel of wills. The Zarketh had been the dominant force in this sector for generations, their supremacy unchallenged, until now. "Keep the channel open," Ford ordered. "Let them know we're waiting." He knew Vrolok was calculating, weighing his options. The Zarketh admiral was a warrior of the old school, driven by pride and an unyielding belief in his people's superiority. Surrender was not in his nature, but neither was recklessness. Ford had to push him to the brink, make him see that there was no victory left to claim. The bridge crew watched their captain, sensing the unspoken battle raging in his mind. They had seen him in action before, his calm, methodical approach that turned the tide in seemingly hopeless situations. But this was different. This wasn't just about strategy. It was about psychology, about understanding the mind of the enemy and outmaneuvering them on every level. Minutes ticked by, the silence growing heavier with each passing moment. The Aegis's weapons remained locked on the flagship, ready to fire at a moment's notice. Outside, the remnants of the Zarketh fleet drifted aimlessly, their formations shattered, their morale crumbling. Finally, the comms crackled to life. Vrolok's voice came through, laced with a bitterness that cut through the static. You humans think you've won, he sneered. But you don't understand what you're up against. We are the Zarkoth Dominion. We are eternal. Ford leaned forward, his gaze hardening. Eternal, maybe. But not invincible. Your fleet is in ruins, Admiral. Your options are dwindling. This is your last chance to surrender. Don't throw away your lives for nothing. There was a pause, a hesitation that Ford seized upon. He could sense Vrolok's inner struggle, the conflict between his pride and the reality of his situation. The Admiral was a product of his culture, conditioned to see humanity as weak and inferior. But now, faced with the undeniable truth, that belief was beginning to crack. We will never bow to lesser beings. Vrolok spat, though his defiance rang hollow. You may win this battle, but the war is far from over. Ford's expression remained impassive, but inside, he felt the tide turning. Vrolok's bravado was a mask, one that was slipping with every word. Then let this be a lesson, Ford replied, his voice cold and unyielding. Humanity doesn't back down. We don't quit. And we don't forgive. The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. The crew could feel the shift, the subtle change in the atmosphere. This was the breaking point, the moment where the battle would either end in bloodshed or with a reluctant surrender. Vrolok's silence spoke volumes. The Zarkoth had never encountered an enemy that fought like this, with such relentless determination and strategic cunning. They had underestimated humanity, seeing them as little more than a nuisance. Now they were faced with the consequences of that arrogance. We will withdraw, Vrolok finally conceded, his voice a grudging snarl. But know this, Captain Ford, this isn't over. The Zarkoth will return, and next time, we will crush you. Ford didn't flinch. We'll be ready. With that, the channel closed, leaving the bridge in a heavy silence. The crew exchanged glances, a mixture of relief and grim resolve on their faces. The immediate threat was over, but the war was far from won. Ford exhaled slowly, allowing himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. They had won this round, but he knew the challenges ahead would be even greater. The Zarkoth were formidable, but so was humanity. And as long as he had breath in his lungs, he would fight to ensure that humanity would not just survive, but thrive. Stand down from battle stations, he ordered, his voice steady. Prepare for recovery operations. And keep an eye on those retreating ships. I don't trust them to keep their word. As the crew moved to carry out his orders, Ford stared out at the void, his mind already turning to the next battle. The Zarkoth were wounded, but they were far from defeated. This war was just beginning, and Ford knew it would test them all to their limits. But if there was one thing he had learned, it was that humanity's true strength lay not in its weapons, but in its unbreakable will. The Reckoning. The Aegis glided through the dark expanse, the stars shimmering like distant embers against the black canvas of space. On the bridge, Captain Elias Ford stood in silence, eyes fixed on the holographic display that mapped the retreat of the Zarkoth fleet. His crew worked quietly, their movements precise and deliberate, a testament to their shared resolve. They had won a battle, but the war loomed larger than ever. Admiral Watanabe on secure channel, Lieutenant Arya Wolf announced, breaking the silence. Priority transmission. Ford nodded, stepping toward the comms station. Put him through. The image of Admiral Watanabe materialized before him, her expression a blend of sternness and concern. The lines on her face spoke of long years in command, of battles fought and victories earned, but also of the weight that such a position carried. Captain Ford, she began, her voice measured, I've been briefed on your engagement with the Zarkoth. I commend your strategy and execution. You've dealt them a serious blow. Ford inclined his head slightly. Thank you, Admiral. But I suspect they're far from defeated. You're right, she agreed, her tone darkening. Our intelligence confirms that the Zarkoth High Command is planning a counterstrike. They've been humiliated, and they won't let that stand. They're mobilizing their reserves. Ford's expression hardened. He had anticipated this. The Zarkoth were proud, and their pride had been wounded. Retaliation was inevitable, and it would be swift and brutal. "What's our plan?" Watanabe's eyes narrowed. "We're preparing for a full-scale assault on their command structure. We need to hit them before they can regroup. The Aegis will lead a task force into Zarketh territory. Your mission is to eliminate their primary fleet base, cripple their ability to launch further attacks." The weight of the mission settled over Ford like a shroud. This was a decisive moment, a chance to turn the tide of the war. But it was also a monumental risk. The Zarketh would be desperate, and desperate enemies were the most dangerous. "We'll be ready," Ford replied, his voice steady. "When do we depart?" 6 hours, Watanabe answered. "Coordinates and mission details are being transmitted now. Godspeed, Captain. Humanity is counting on you." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in a tense silence. Ford turned to his crew, their faces a mix of determination and apprehension. They knew what lay ahead, and they knew the stakes. "Lieutenant Wolf, plot a course to the target coordinates," Ford ordered. "Inform all hands to prepare for combat operations. This is the moment we've trained for." "Aye, sir," Wolf responded, her fingers flying across the console. Course laid in. All decks on high alert. As the crew moved with purpose, Ford took a deep breath, steadying himself for the battle to come. He knew what was at stake, more than just the lives of his crew, but the future of humanity itself. The Zarketh had underestimated them, dismissed them as weak and insignificant. But now, they would learn what humanity was truly capable of. The minutes ticked by, the ship alive with the hum of readiness. The Aegis cut through the void, a sleek predator on the hunt, its weapons primed and shields charged. Ford could feel the tension mounting, the anticipation building like a coiled spring ready to snap. Finally, the Zarketh base came into view on the display, a sprawling complex bristling with defenses, its shields glowing faintly in the darkness. It was a formidable target, but Ford knew they had the element of surprise. The Zarketh were expecting a defensive posture, not an aggressive strike deep into their territory. "Bring us out of warp," Ford commanded, his voice calm but firm. "Prepare to engage." The Aegis dropped out of warp, its engines flaring as it slowed to attack speed. The bridge was a hive of activity, the crew focused and resolute. On the main screen, the Zarketh base loomed large, its turrets swiveling to lock onto the incoming threat. "Enemy base has powered up weapons," Lieutenant Wolf reported. "They're scrambling fighters." Ford's gaze remained fixed on the screen. "Launch all squadrons. Target their shield generators. We need to bring those defenses down fast." The Aegis shook as the first volley of enemy fire struck its shields. The ship returned fire, its pulse cannons blazing in the darkness. Squadrons of human fighters streaked toward the base, weaving through the hail of anti-aircraft fire, their lasers lancing out to strike at the heart of the Zarketh defenses. The battle escalated rapidly, the void alive with the glow of energy weapons and the flash of explosions. The Aegis pressed forward, its guns pounding the enemy base with relentless precision. Inside, Ford could feel the pressure building, the weight of command bearing down on him. This was it, the turning point. There was no room for doubt, no margin for error. "Shields are at 60%, Wolf reported, her voice tight with urgency. "We're taking heavy fire." "Hold the line," Ford ordered, his tone unyielding. "We break them here, or we fall." The seconds dragged on, each one an eternity. The Aegis's guns roared, its shields flaring as they absorbed the relentless barrage. The enemy base was weakening, its shields flickering under the sustained assault. But the Zarketh were throwing everything they had into the fight, their desperation driving them to new heights of fury. "Shield generators are down!" Wolf exclaimed, a note of triumph in her voice. "All weapons, target the command center," Ford commanded, his eyes blazing with determination. "Finish this." The Aegis unleashed its full firepower, a barrage of energy blasts converging on the heart of the Zarketh base. The enemy defenses crumbled, and with a final, cataclysmic explosion, the command center was obliterated, sending shockwaves rippling through the void. The silence that followed was deafening. The Zarketh fleet, leaderless and broken, began to scatter, their will to fight shattered. Ford exhaled slowly, the tension easing from his shoulders. "Stand down from battle stations," he ordered, his voice laced with exhaustion and relief. "We did it!" The bridge erupted in cheers, the crews celebrating their hard-won victory. But Ford knew this was just the beginning. The Zarketh were far from defeated, and the road ahead would be long and perilous. But for now, they had struck a decisive blow, one that would echo across the stars. As the Aegis turned back toward friendly space, Ford allowed himself a small, weary smile. Humanity had proven its strength, its resilience. And no matter what came next, he knew they would face it together, united, unyielding, and unstoppable.